The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a trail of drag marks that disappeared into the dense forest. My hand instinctively tightened around the grip of my service weapon as I stepped away from my patrol car, its lights still flashing silently in the night. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. In my 15 years on the force, I'd never encountered a scene quite like this. It had started as a routine call, an abandoned vehicle on a remote stretch of Highway 16. Nothing unusual for a Tuesday night in the rural outskirts of Millbrook County. But as soon as I pulled up behind the deserted sedan, I knew something was off. The driver's door hung open, creaking slightly in the breeze. The interior light cast an eerie glow on the empty seats. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The car's engine was cold, but a cell phone on the passenger seat still displayed a bright screen. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the cup holder, lipstick staining its rim. That's when I noticed the drag marks. 2 parallel lines in the dirt leading from the driver's side towards the tree line. My pulse quickened as I followed them with my flashlight, watching them disappear into the undergrowth about 20 yards from the road. I keyed my radio, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I'm at the scene of the abandoned vehicle. Signs of possible foul play. Requesting backup to my location." I waited for a response, but all I got was a burst of static. I tried again, adjusting the radio's frequency, but the result was the same. Nothing but crackling interference. Great, just great. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Protocol said to wait for backup in a situation like this. But what if someone was hurt in those woods, needing immediate help? Every minute could count. Decision made, I unholstered my weapon and clicked on my body cam. With one last glance at my silent radio, I started towards the forest, following the drag marks. The woods seemed to swallow me as I passed the first line of trees. The sounds of the highway faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under my feet. My flashlight beam bounced off tree trunks and tangled undergrowth, creating twisted shadows that seemed to move in my peripheral vision. I tried to focus on the trail, but it was becoming harder to follow. The forest floor was thick with leaves and pine needles obscuring any clear marks. I paused, sweeping my light in a wide arc, searching for any sign of disturbance. There, about 10 yards ahead, I spotted a scrap of fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. I moved closer, my heart pounding. It was a piece of blue denim, frayed as if it had been torn from a larger garment. A jean jacket, maybe? I bagged the fabric as evidence, then continued deeper into the woods. The silence was oppressive now, broken only by my own labored breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A twig snapped loudly somewhere to my left. I whirled, gun raised, but saw nothing but shadows. "Police, is anyone there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the darkness. No response. I was about to turn back to my original path when a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, a flash of pale skin disappearing behind a large oak tree. "Stop! Police!" I shouted, breaking into a run. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I rounded the oak tree, ready to confront whoever I'd seen, but there was no one there. Breathing heavily, I spun in a circle, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the trees. Nothing. Had I imagined it? That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my blood running cold. 2 eyes reflected the light of my flash, glowing an eerie yellow-green in the darkness. They were too high off the ground to belong to a dog or coyote. Whatever this was, it was big. I raised my weapon, trying to steady my shaking hands. "Back off!" I yelled, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. The eyes blinked once, then vanished. For a long moment I stood frozen, straining to hear any sound of movement. The forest had gone deathly quiet. Suddenly my radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Unit 17, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Backup is en route to your location." I fumbled for the radio at my shoulder. "Dispatch, this is 17. I'm about a quarter mile into the woods east of the vehicle. Possible suspect sighting. I need..." A blood-curdling scream cut through the night, so close it made my ears ring. I dropped into a crouch, weapon at the ready, frantically searching for the source. Another scream, this one filled with pain and terror. It was coming from deeper in the woods. Shit. I muttered, torn between self-preservation and duty. In the end, there was really no choice. I ran towards the sound, heart hammering in my chest. The screams led me to a small clearing. My flashlight beam fell on a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman lay on the ground, her clothes torn and bloody. Standing over her was something. In the split second before it turned to face me, I caught a glimpse of matted fur, elongated limbs, and wickedly curved claws. Then it looked at me with those glowing eyes, and my world shifted on its axis. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't exist outside of campfire stories and bad horror movies. And yet here it was, as solid and terrifying as the gun in my shaking hands. Time seemed to stand still as we faced each other across the clearing. I knew I should shoot, should empty my entire clip into this monster, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of those inhuman eyes. The creature's muzzle pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. It tensed, preparing to spring. The spell broke. I fired, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding me. The thing howled, a sound of rage rather than pain, and lunged. I dove to the side, feeling the wind of its passage as it barely missed me. I rolled, came up firing. 2 shots, 3. The monster staggered but didn't fall. It whirled to face me again, and this time I got a clear look at what I was dealing with. It was vaguely wolf-like in shape, but much larger, easily 7 feet tall, standing on its hind legs. Its front limbs ended in hands tipped with razor-sharp claws, and its face... God, its face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features with eyes that held an undeniable intelligence. Those eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something there that chilled me to my core. Recognition. This thing knew me. Somehow, impossibly, it knew who I was. Before I could process that thought, it attacked again. I fired my last 2 rounds, then it was on me. We went down in a tangle of limbs, its hot breath on my face as I fought to keep those snapping jaws away from my throat. I don't know how long we struggled. Time lost all meaning as I fought for my life, driven by sheer animal instinct. I was vaguely aware of my body cam being torn away, of claws raking across my chest, of my own hoarse screams joining the creature's snarls. Just when I thought it was over, when I felt my strength failing, a new sound cut through the chaos. Shouted voices, flashlight beams sweeping the clearing. Backup had arrived. The creature's head snapped up at the intrusion. It gave me one last look. Was that regret I saw in those alien eyes? Then bounded away into the darkness with incredible speed. Hands grabbed me, pulled me to my feet. Voices asked if I was all right, what had happened, where was the suspect? I couldn't answer. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd fought? They'd think I was crazy. As my fellow officers secured the scene and tended to the injured woman, I sank to the ground, my back against a tree. I stared at my torn, bloody uniform, at the claw marks on my chest. It had been real, all of it, but I knew with a certainty that settled in my bones that no one would ever believe me. This would go down in the official report as an attack by a large animal, possibly a bear. The woman, once she recovered, would likely claim the same, unable to face the truth of what had really happened. And me? I'd lie too. I'd talk about the confusion of the fight, the poor visibility, the adrenaline that made everything seem larger than life. I'd go to the mandatory psych eval and say all the right things. I'd go back to work and pretend this night never happened, but I'd know the truth. And I'd wonder, every time I patrolled a dark stretch of highway or answered a call in a remote area, if those glowing eyes were watching me from the shadows, waiting. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I made a silent vow. I would find answers. I would discover what was really lurking in the forests of Millbrook County. And somehow, someday, I would make sure that thing paid for what it had done. But for now, I had a job to do. I stood up, wincing at my injuries, and walked over to give my statement. Just another night on patrol in Millbrook County. God help us all. Story 2. I never thought I'd be grateful for my son's motion sickness. If it wasn't for his queasy stomach, we might not be here today. It's funny how the small things, the annoyances, the inconveniences can end up saving your life. It was supposed to be a simple summer road trip. Me, my wife Sarah, and our 2 kids, Tommy and Lisa, heading to my parents' lakeside cabin for a week of swimming, fishing, and mosquito-slapping fun. We'd made the drive a dozen times before, always taking the main highways. But this year, I'd gotten it into my head to try a scenic route through the mountains. It'll be an adventure, I'd said. If only I'd known. We left home early Saturday morning, the minivan packed to the gills with suitcases, coolers, and enough snacks to feed a small army. The first few hours were great. The kids were entertained by their tablets, Sarah was reading her book, and I was enjoying the winding mountain roads, feeling like I was starring in my own car commercial. Then Tommy started complaining. "Dad, my tummy feels weird." I glanced in the rearview mirror. The poor kid did look a little green. "Oh, it's okay, buddy. We'll stop at the next rest area." But we didn't reach the next rest area. About 20 minutes later, I felt the car shudder. The engine made a sound like it was clearing its throat, then coughed and died. I managed to coast onto the shoulder before we lost all momentum. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, looking up from her book. I turned the key. The engine wheezed but wouldn't catch. "I don't know. Maybe we're out of gas. But the gauge says we're half full." I tried again, nothing. Damn it. We were in the middle of nowhere. The two-lane highway cut through dense forest with no houses or buildings in sight. My cell phone showed no bars. Sarah's was the same. "What are we going to do?" she asked, a note of worry creeping into her voice. I forced a smile. "It'll be fine. We'll just wait for someone to come by and ask them to call for help when they reach a town." So we waited. And waited. An hour passed, then 2. Not a single car. I'd never seen a highway so empty. The sun climbed higher, turning the car into an oven. We rationed our water and snacks, not knowing how long we'd be stuck. Just when I was considering trying to walk to find help, we heard it, the distant rumble of an engine. I stepped out onto the shoulder, waving my arms as a battered blue pickup truck came around the bend. The truck slowed and pulled over about 20 feet behind us. The driver's door creaked open and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt despite the heat. A scraggly beard covered the lower half of his face, and a baseball cap cast his eyes in shadow. "Y'all having some trouble?" he called out, his voice gravelly. I nodded, relief washing over me. "Yeah, a car just died on us. Don't suppose you have a phone that works out here?" He shook his head. "Nah, no reception for miles, but I can take a look if you want. Used to be a mechanic." "That'd be great, thanks." As he walked towards me, I noticed he had a slight limp. He stopped at the front of our van, popping the hood with practiced ease. "Name's Earl," he said, peering into the engine compartment. "I'm Dave. That's my wife Sarah and our kids, Tommy and Lisa." I gestured towards the car where my family was watching curiously. Earl grunted in acknowledgement, his hands moving over the engine with confidence. After a few minutes, he straightened up. "Well, good news is it ain't your engine. Looks like your fuel pump's shot. Bad news is you ain't going nowhere without replacing it." My heart sank. "How far to the nearest town?" "About 60 miles that-a-way." He jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "But tell you what, I got a buddy runs a garage not too far from here. I can give you a tow, have you fixed up in no time." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be wary of strangers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did we have? "That'd be amazing," I said. "We really appreciate it." Earl nodded and went back to his truck, returning with a tow chain. As he hooked it up to our van, I helped my family out. Tommy looked relieved to be free of the car, while Lisa clung to Sarah's leg, eyeing Earl suspiciously. "All right, you folks can ride with me," Earl said, gesturing to his truck. "It'll be a bit cramped, but it ain't far." We piled in, the kids squeezed between Sarah and me in the middle of the bench seat. Earl's truck smelled of cigarettes and something metallic I couldn't quite place. Tools and bits of machinery cluttered the floor. As we started moving, I tried to make conversation. "So, you from around here?" Earl kept his eyes on the road. "Born and raised. Know these mountains like the back of my hand. Must be nice living out here, so peaceful." He grunted. "Has its moments." We lapsed into silence. I noticed scratch marks on the inside of the passenger door, deep grooves in the metal like something had tried to claw its way out. A chill ran down my spine despite the stuffy heat of the truck cab. We turned off the main highway onto a narrow dirt road. The trees pressed in close on either side, branches scraping against the truck. How had I not noticed this turnoff before? "Your friend's garage is out this way," I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Earl nodded. "Yep, Joe likes his privacy." The road seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the forest. Tommy started to fidget, and even Sarah was looking nervous now. I was about to suggest turning back when we rounded a bend and a clearing opened up before us. A ramshackle building stood in the center, more shed than garage. Rusted car parts and old tires littered the yard. Earl pulled up and cut the engine. "Here we are," he said. "I'll go see if Joe's around." As he climbed out, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Dave, I don't like this," she whispered. "Something feels off." I nodded, my own unease growing. "I know. Let's just get the car fixed and get out of here as quick as we can." Earl disappeared into the garage. Moments later, we heard raised voices. It sounded like an argument. "Stay here," I told Sarah and the kids. I opened the door and stepped out, approaching the garage cautiously. As I got closer, I could make out words. "I told you not to bring them here." A voice I didn't recognize, Joe, I assumed. "What was I supposed to do? Leave them on the side of the road?" Earl's voice. "Yes, that's exactly what you were supposed to do. We talked about this, Earl. No more." They fell silent as I reached the doorway. Earl and another man, shorter, heavy-set, with grease-stained overalls, stood facing each other. They both turned to look at me. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. The newcomer, Joe, forced a smile. "Just fine. Earl here was just filling me in on your situation. Let's take a look at that van of yours, shall we?" We walked back to where Earl had left our van. Joe circled it, muttering to himself. "Yep, fuel pump's definitely shot," he said finally. "Lucky for you, I think I got a compatible one in stock. Shouldn't take more than an hour to swap out." Relief flooded through me. "That's great news. We really appreciate your help." Joe waved it off. "Don't mention it. Why don't you folks wait inside where it's cool? I've got some sodas in the fridge." I helped Sarah and the kids out of Earl's truck, and we followed Joe into the garage. The interior was cluttered but surprisingly clean. A small fridge hummed in the corner next to a battered sofa. "Make yourselves comfortable," Joe said. "I'll get started on your van." As he walked out, I noticed him shoot a pointed look at Earl, who had followed us in. Earl nodded almost imperceptibly. We sat on the sofa, the kids happily slurping on cold sodas. Sarah leaned close to me. "I still don't feel right about this," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "I know, but they're fixing the car. We'll be out of here soon." Earl loomed nearby, trying to look casual as he fiddled with tools on a workbench. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Tommy spoke up. "Mister, why does your truck have scratches inside?" Earl's head snapped up. "What?" "The door," Tommy said. "It has scratches inside. Did you have a really big dog?" Earl's face darkened. He took a step towards us. "You shouldn't go poking around in other people's vehicles, boy." I stood up, putting myself between Earl and my family. "He didn't mean any harm. Kids are just curious." Earl's eyes bored into mine. For a long moment, I thought he might take a swing at me. Then his shoulders slumped. "Ain't no dog," he said quietly. "It was a girl, last summer. She was real scared." My blood ran cold. Sarah gasped behind me. Earl's eyes had a faraway look. I didn't want to. Told Joe we should stop, but he said we were in too deep. He focused on me again. "You seem like good folks. You should leave. Now, Earl..." Joe's voice boomed from outside. "Get out here and give me a hand." Earl looked at the door, then back at us. He seemed to be wrestling with something internally. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. "My truck," he said, pressing the key into my hand. "Take it. Get your family out of here. There's a town about 30 miles east. Don't stop for anyone." I stared at him, uncomprehending. But what about..." "No time," he hissed. "Go. Now. I'll stall Joe." Snapping out of my daze, I grabbed Tommy while Sarah scooped up Lisa. We hurried out the side door of the garage. I could hear Joe yelling something, his voice getting closer. We piled into Earl's truck. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of the clearing, dirt spraying behind us. In the rearview mirror, I saw Joe run out of the garage, his face contorted with rage. Earl stood in the doorway, watching us go. I drove like a man possessed, taking the winding dirt road at speeds that had Sarah white-knuckling the dashboard. We finally reached the highway and I turned east as Earl had said. It was fully dark by the time we reached the town. The local police were skeptical of our story at first, but a search of the area eventually turned up evidence corroborating our account. Earl and Joe were arrested, and it turned out they were responsible for a string of disappearances along that stretch of highway. We never did make it to my parents' cabin that summer. Somehow none of us felt much like a vacation after that. But sitting here now with my family safe around me, I'm grateful. Grateful for Earl's change of heart. Grateful for Tommy's car sickness that made us an less than ideal target. Grateful for all the little things that have to go right for a family to survive. These days we stick to the main roads when we travel, and we never ever pick up hitchhikers. Story 3. The gas gauge needle hovered just above empty, mocking me with its stubborn refusal to budge. I squinted through the windshield, searching for any sign of civilization along the desolate stretch of highway. That's when I saw it. A lonely gas station sign flickering in the distance, a beacon of hope in the encroaching twilight. "Look, kids," I called out, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We're in luck. There's a place to stop coming up." My wife, Sarah, stirred from her nap in the passenger seat. "Thank goodness," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "I could use a restroom break." I pulled off the highway onto a narrow road that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. Our minivan bounced and jostled over potholes, the suspension groaning in protest. As we approached the gas station, I could see it was as run down as the road leading to it. The paint was peeling, and only half the fluorescent lights in the overhead canopy were working, casting alternating patches of light and shadow over the cracked concrete. I pulled up to one of the two pumps and cut the engine. "All right, gang," I said, turning to face the back seat. "A quick pit stop. Who needs the bathroom?" Our oldest, Mia, was engrossed in her book and just shook her head. But 6-year-old Tommy was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Me, I gotta go bad." Sarah yawned and stretched. "I'll take him," she said. "Can you fill up the tank?" I nodded, stepping out of the van. The air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of rain. In the distance, I could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. I shivered, suddenly eager to get back on the road. As I began pumping gas, I watched Sarah lead Tommy towards the small convenience store attached to the station. The windows were grimy, making it impossible to see inside. A bell jingled as they disappeared through the door. I turned my attention back to the pump, watching the numbers tick upward. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic click of the pump and the occasional gust of wind rustling through the tall grass beyond the station. After a few minutes, I finished filling the tank and replaced the nozzle. I walked around to the driver's side window and leaned in. "Mia, I'm going to run inside and pay. You okay out here for a minute?" She nodded without looking up from her book. I hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and headed towards the store. As I approached, I realized I hadn't seen Sarah or Tommy come out yet. Maybe the bathroom was dirtier than expected, I thought. The bell above the door jangled as I entered. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered, shelves overflowing with dusty snacks and automotive supplies. Behind a cluttered counter stood an old man with a scraggly gray beard, his rheumy eyes regarding me suspiciously. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Just need to pay for pump one." "Oh, and have you seen my wife and son? They came in to use the restroom a few minutes ago." The old man's brow furrowed. "Ain't seen nobody but you," he rasped. A chill ran down my spine. "Are you sure? Blonde woman, little boy about this tall?" I held my hand out to indicate Tommy's height. The man shook his head slowly. "Told you, ain't seen nobody." My heart began to race. "Where's your bathroom?" I demanded. He jerked his thumb towards the back of the store. I rushed past him, calling out, "Sarah? Tommy?" I found the bathroom door and knocked forcefully. "Sarah? Are you in there?" No response. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The tiny bathroom was empty. Panic began to set in. I sprinted back to the front of the store. "They're not here," I said, my voice rising. "Where are they?" The old man's expression remained impassive. "Mister, I already told you, ain't nobody come in here but you." "That's impossible," I snapped. "I watched them walk in. They have to be here somewhere." I began frantically searching the store, calling their names as I rushed up and down the narrow aisles. With each passing second, my desperation grew. They weren't here. How could they not be here? I ran back outside, hoping against hope that they had returned to the van without me noticing. But as I approached, I could see through the windows that Mia was still alone in the back seat. "Mia!" I shouted, yanking open the door. "Have Mom and Tommy come back to the van?" She looked up, startled by my tone. "No, Dad, what's wrong?" "Stay here," I ordered, slamming the door shut. I ran around the small building, searching for any other doors or windows they could have exited through. There was nothing. By the time I made it back to the front of the station, I was gasping for breath, my mind racing with horrible possibilities. I burst back into the store, making the old man jump. "Call the police," I demanded. "My wife and son are missing." The man's eyes narrowed. "Now hold on just a minute." "No!" I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. "I'm not crazy. I'm not confused. They walked into this store and now they're gone. Call the police right now, or I swear to God I'll—" All right, the man grumbled, reaching for an ancient rotary phone on the counter. As he began to dial, I paced back and forth, running my hands through my hair. How could this be happening? It didn't make any sense. People don't just vanish into thin air. There had to be an explanation. Maybe they had wandered off somewhere while I was pumping gas. But no, I had watched them enter the store. I was certain of it. I barely registered the old man's conversation with the police, my mind whirling with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. When he hung up, he turned to me with a scowl. "They're sending someone out," he said. "But it'll be a while. We're pretty far out here." I nodded absently, still pacing. "I need to look around again," I muttered. More to myself than to him. There has to be something I missed. This time I moved more slowly through the store, scrutinizing every shelf, every corner. I checked behind stacks of beer cases and piles of windshield washer fluid. I even looked inside the ancient ice cream freezer, half expecting to find a secret passage. As I neared the back of the store again, something caught my eye. There was a small gap between two metal shelving units, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I squeezed between them, ignoring the old man's protests behind me. In the narrow space behind the shelves, I found a door. It was painted the same dingy color as the walls, blending in almost perfectly. My heart pounding, I reached for the handle. It was locked. "Open this door," I demanded, whirling to face the old man. He had followed me back and was standing a few feet away, his face pale. "Now, mister, that ain't for customers." I grabbed him by the front of his grimy shirt. "Open the door right now, or I swear I'll break it down myself." His eyes darted nervously between my face and the door. After a moment, he reached into his pocket with a trembling hand and produced a key. I snatched it from him and fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in. Finally, I heard the click of the mechanism releasing. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. A set of stairs led down into darkness. The musty smell of damp earth wafted up, making me gag. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. "Sarah," I called out, my voice echoing in the narrow stairwell. "Tommy." For a moment there was only silence. Then faintly I heard it, a muffled cry. "Tommy," I shouted, plunging down the stairs without hesitation. The beam of my phone's flashlight bounced wildly as I descended, revealing bare concrete walls and a dirt floor. At the bottom, the passage opened up into a small room. My light swept across the space, revealing shelves lined with canned goods and jugs of water. And there, huddled in the corner, were Sarah and Tommy. Sarah's hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and another strip covered her mouth. Tommy was curled up next to her, his eyes wide with terror. When he saw me, he let out a strangled sob. "Oh my God," I breathed, rushing to them. I dropped to my knees, tearing at the duct tape on Sarah's wrists. "It's okay, I'm here. You're safe now." As soon as her hands were free, Sarah ripped the tape from her mouth. "Behind you!" she screamed. I spun around just in time to see a dark figure lunging towards me. There was a flash of metal, and then a searing pain exploded in my shoulder. I stumbled backward, colliding with the shelves. Cans clattered to the floor around me. Through the haze of pain, I saw the old man from the store standing over me, a bloody knife in his hand. His eyes were wild, his breathing ragged. "You shouldn't have come down here," he wheezed. "Nobody was supposed to find this place." I glanced around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself and my family. My eyes fell on a heavy flashlight that had fallen from one of the shelves. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cool metal just as the old man moved to strike again. I swung the flashlight with all my strength, connecting solidly with the side of his head. He crumpled to the ground, the knife clattering from his grip. For a moment I stood there, gasping for breath, the flashlight still clutched in my shaking hand. Then I heard Tommy's frightened whimper, and reality came crashing back. I rushed to untie Sarah's feet, then scooped Tommy into my arms. "Let's go," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." We stumbled up the stairs and through the store, not stopping until we reached the van. Mia's eyes widened in shock as we piled in, Sarah and Tommy still shaking, my shirt stained with blood. As I peeled out of the gas station, tires squealing on the cracked pavement, I could see flashing lights approaching in the distance. I pulled over, waving frantically at the approaching police car. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, paramedics, and comforting hugs. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, wincing as a medic cleaned my wound, I watched Sarah talking to a police officer, Tommy clinging tightly to her leg. I knew we had a long road ahead of us. Police statements, counseling, nightmares that would likely plague us for months to come. But in that moment, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. My family was safe, we were together, and I swore to myself that I would never again take for granted the precious, fragile nature of that simple fact. As the ambulance doors closed and we began the journey to the hospital, I reached out and took Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. No words were necessary. We had survived, and we would face whatever came next together. Story 4. The stench hit me first. Even through the thick rubber gloves and my years of experience handling all sorts of nasty trash, this smell was different. Wrong. As I hefted the suspiciously heavy bag into the truck's hopper, I felt something shift inside. Something that shouldn't be there. That's when I knew this Tuesday morning route was about to become anything but routine. My name's Mike, and I've been working sanitation for the better part of a decade. You'd think after all this time I'd have seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover on this crisp autumn morning in the quiet suburbs of Maplewood. The day had started like any other. I'd rolled out of bed at 4 a.m., kissed my sleeping wife goodbye, and headed to the depot to start my shift. The pre-dawn air was chilly, and a light fog hung over the streets as I maneuvered my truck through the familiar neighborhoods. I was about halfway through my route when I pulled up to the Johnson house. Nice place, well-kept lawn, always on time with their trash out front. But today, something felt off. The curtains were drawn tight, which was unusual for Mrs. Johnson. She liked to wave as we passed by. And there, among the normal array of garbage bags and recycling bins, was a large black bag that didn't belong. I hopped down from the cab, the familiar creak of the door and the hiss of the air brakes breaking the morning silence. As I approached the pile, that smell hit me, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. I've dealt with some nasty stuff in this job, but this was different. It reminded me of the time we found a dead possum in Old Man Harrison's trash bin, but stronger, more human. I should have left it. Should have called it in, waited for the cops. But curiosity got the better of me. I reached for the bag, surprised by its weight. As I lifted it, I felt something inside shift and move, like dead weights settling. My heart was pounding now, a cold sweat breaking out despite the chill in the air. With shaking hands, I set the bag down on the curb and reached for my box cutter. I hesitated for a moment, then sliced through the thick plastic. The smell that burst out nearly knocked me off my feet. But it was nothing compared to the horror of what I saw inside. Tangled hair, pale flesh, and blood, so much blood. I stumbled back, my boot catching on the curb, and I went down hard on the sidewalk. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I scrambled away from the bag, my mind reeling. There was a body in that bag, a human body. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, movement caught my eye. A curtain twitched in the Johnsons' front window. Someone was watching. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How do you even begin to explain something like this? Before I could gather my thoughts, the screech of tires cut through the morning quiet. A car came tearing around the corner, engine roaring. It screeched to a halt right in front of the house, and two men in dark clothes leaped out. "Hey!" I shouted, finding my voice at last. "Stop right there!" They ignored me, rushing towards the bag. One of them grabbed it while the other turned to face me. The glint of metal in his hand made my blood run cold. A gun. "Walk away, garbage man," he growled. "You didn't see nothing." I raised my hand slowly, my phone still clutched in one fist. The 911 operator's voice was a tinny whisper from the speaker. Sir, are you there? What's your emergency, Wu? The man's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. His face hardened. Drop it. Now, I let the phone fall to the ground, my mind racing. Who were these guys? What were they doing with the body? And most importantly, how the hell was I going to get out of this alive? The other man had the bag in the trunk now. He slammed it shut and called out, "Let's go!" Gun guy backed towards the car, keeping his weapon trained on me. "Remember," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you saw nothing. You tell anyone about this and we'll know. And we'll find you." They peeled out, leaving the acrid smell of burning rubber in their wake. I stood there, shaking for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Then I snatched up my phone. "Sir? Sir, are you all right? We've dispatched officers to your location." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Yeah, I'm here. There's been... God, I don't even know how to explain it. Just hurry, please." As I waited for the police to arrive, my mind was spinning. What had I just witnessed? Who were those men? And perhaps most disturbingly, what was going on in the Johnson house? I glanced back at the house and my blood ran cold. Mrs. Johnson was standing at the window now, staring right at me. Her face was pale, eyes wide with what looked like fear. Or was it guilt? The wail of approaching sirens snapped me back to reality. 2 patrol cars rounded the corner, lights flashing. As the officers approached, I tried to organize my thoughts. How could I explain what had just happened without sounding completely insane? "Sir, are you the one who called 911? I nodded, still feeling dazed. "Yeah, that's me. I'm Mike. I work sanitation. I was just doing my route and..." I trailed off, suddenly unsure of how to continue. The older of the 2 officers, his nameplate reading Davidson, gave me an encouraging nod. "Take your time, sir. Just tell us what you saw." So I did. I told them about the strange bag, the horrible smell, what I'd found inside. I described the 2 men who'd shown up, the gun, the threats. By the time I finished, a detective had arrived on the scene, and they were all looking at me with a mix of concern and skepticism. "That's quite a story, Mr. Donovan," I supplied. "Mike Donovan." The detective nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "Mr. Donovan, I'm Detective Reeves. Can you think of any reason why someone would want to dispose of a body in this neighborhood?" I shook my head. "No, it doesn't make any sense. This is a quiet area, nice folks. The Johnsons have lived here for years, never any trouble." I trailed off, remembering Mrs. Johnson's face in the window. Should I mention that? Before I could decide, the front door of the house opened and Mr. Johnson stepped out. "Officers? Is everything all right? We heard sirens." Detective Reeves turned to address him, and I used the moment to scan the front of the house. Mrs. Johnson was no longer at the window. As the detective spoke with Mr. Johnson, I noticed Officer Davidson examining the area where the bag had been. He frowned, then called out, "Detective, you might want to take a look at this." We all moved closer. There on the pavement was a small, dark stain. It could have been anything, oil from a car, spilled coffee, but I knew better. It was blood. The next few hours passed in a blur. More police arrived, the area was cordoned off, and I found myself telling my story over and over. They took my clothes for evidence, swabbed my hands, photographed the scratches on my arms from where I'd fallen. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I watched as the Johnsons were led out of their house in handcuffs. Mrs. Johnson was sobbing, while Mr. Johnson's face was a mask of grim resignation. I caught his eye as they passed, and the look he gave me sent chills down my spine. It was a look of pure hatred. By the time they finally let me go, it was well into the afternoon. I climbed into my truck, my replacement driver having long since taken over my route. As I sat there, key in the ignition, the events of the morning replayed in my mind. I thought about Mrs. Johnson's face in the window, Mr. Johnson's hateful glare. I thought about the 2 men with the gun, their threat echoing in my ears. "We'll find you." A tap on the window made me jump. It was Detective Reeves. "Mr. Donovan, one last thing. We're going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement." I nodded numbly. "And Mike," he added, his voice softening slightly, "you did the right thing today. Not everyone would have had the courage to report what you saw." As he walked away, I wasn't sure if I felt comforted or terrified. I had done the right thing, yes, but at what cost? I started the truck, the familiar rumble of the engine oddly comforting. As I pulled away from the curb, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had irrevocably changed. The quiet suburban streets I'd driven for years suddenly seemed sinister, full of hidden dangers and dark secrets. One thing was certain: I would never look at a garbage bag the same way again. And as I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors were hiding behind the manicured lawns and picket fences of Maplewood. And more importantly, would I be around long enough to find out? The weight of the day's events settled on my shoulders as I merged onto the highway. Whatever came next, I knew my simple life as a garbage man was over. I'd stumbled into something dark and dangerous, and there was no going back. All I could do now was hope I'd survive long enough to see justice done. As the suburban sprawl of Maplewood faded in my rearview mirror, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened, no matter who came after me, I would see this through. For the victim in that bag, for the truth, and for my own peace of mind. The garbage man had become an unlikely hero, and I was determined to live up to that role, no matter the cost. Story 5. I should have kept driving. That's what I tell myself now in the cold light of day. But hindsight is 20/20ths, and when you've been on the road for 16 hours straight, even a flickering neon vacancy sign looks like salvation. It had been a long day. Scratch that, a long week. My job as a traveling pharmaceutical rep meant endless miles of highway, punctuated by sterile conference rooms and forced smiles. I was on the last leg of a grueling Midwest tour, just wanting to get home to my own bed and my dog Max. But as night fell and the rain started, I knew I wasn't going to make it. My eyes were heavy, the white lines on the road blurring into a hypnotic stream. I needed to stop, to sleep, before I became another statistic on these lonely highways. That's when I saw it, the Pinewood Motel. The sign was old, half the bulbs burnt out, but the vacancy light shone like a beacon. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The office was a small, wood-paneled room that smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. A heavy-set man with thinning hair sat behind the desk, eyes glued to a small TV playing an old western. "Evening," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Got any rooms available?" He looked up, blinking as if surprised to see a customer. "Sure do, just you." I nodded, stifling a yawn. "Just me." One night, he turned, grabbing a key from the pegboard behind him. "Room 13? $40, cash only." I hesitated. Who doesn't take cards these days? But I was too tired to argue. I dug out 2 20s from my wallet and handed them over. "Checkout's at 11, he grunted, sliding the key across the counter. "Enjoy your stay." I trudged back out into the rain, wheeling my small suitcase behind me. Room 13 was at the far end of the building, tucked into a corner. The key stuck in the lock, requiring some jiggling before the door finally swung open with a creak. The room was, well, about what you'd expect for $40. Faded floral wallpaper, a sagging double bed, and a TV that looked older than I was. But it was dry and it had a bed. At that point, I would have slept on the floor if it meant I could close my eyes. I did a quick check lukewarm water in the shower, scratchy but clean towels, no visible bugs. Good enough. I changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, my standard road trip pajamas, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. I dreamed of endless highways, of driving and driving, but never getting anywhere. In the dream, something was chasing me, always just out of sight in my rearview mirror. I jolted awake, heart racing. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Something felt off. That's when I noticed the camera. It was small, barely visible in the corner where the ceiling met the wall. If I hadn't been lying at just the right angle, I might have missed it entirely. But there it was, a tiny lens, a faint red light blinking steadily. I sat up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. Was I imagining things? Maybe it was just a smoke detector. But as I looked around the room, I spotted another one, then another. They were everywhere, cleverly hidden in the lamp behind the TV, even one in the vent of the air conditioning unit. My blood ran cold. This wasn't normal, this wasn't legal. I had to get out of here. Moving as quietly as I could, I slipped out of bed and started gathering my things. I was halfway through packing when I heard it. Footsteps in the parking lot coming closer. I froze, my t-shirt halfway into my suitcase. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. There was a moment of silence, then the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. Panic surged through me. I looked around wildly, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The bathroom, it was my only chance. I darted inside, closing the door as softly as I could, just as I heard the room door open. Heart pounding, I pressed my ear to the bathroom door, straining to hear. Slow, heavy footsteps entered the room. I could hear them moving around, pausing occasionally, checking the cameras, looking for me. I held my breath, afraid even the slightest sound would give me away. The footsteps approached the bathroom. I stepped back, looking around desperately. The window small, but maybe big enough. I moved towards it, my hand on the latch. A sharp knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Sir?" It was the man from the front desk. "Is everything all right?" I didn't answer. Maybe if he thought I'd left, he'd go away. Another knock, harder this time. "I know you're in there, sir. We need to talk." Talk about what? The illegal cameras? The fact that he'd entered my room in the middle of the night? None of this was adding up to anything good. "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. Then, to my surprise, a heavy sigh. "Please, sir, it's not what you think. I can explain everything, just come out so we can talk." I hesitated. He sounded resigned, scared even. Against my better judgment, curiosity began to override my fear. What the hell was going on here? "I'm armed," I lied. "Try anything and I'll defend myself." "I understand," he said. I'm stepping back from the door. "I'm not armed. I just want to talk." Slowly, I opened the bathroom door. The man from the front desk stood in the middle of the room, hands raised in a placating gesture. In the better light, I could see the deep circles under his eyes, the worried creases in his forehead. "Start talking," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He nodded, lowering his hands slowly. "My name's Frank. I've owned this place for 30 years. Never had any trouble until—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Until what?" I prompted. "It started about a year ago, people checking in, then disappearing, no trace, just gone. Their cars would still be here, their stuff untouched, but they'd vanish into thin air." I frowned. "And the cameras? My idea," he admitted. I thought, if I could watch the rooms, maybe I'd see what was happening. Maybe I could stop it. It sounded crazy, but the fear in his eyes, the slump of his shoulders, it all seemed genuine. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. He laughed bitterly. "I did. They investigated, found nothing. Said people probably just left in the night, abandoned their cars, but I know that's not true. Something is happening here, something—" He shuddered. "Something not natural." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, not natural?" Frank opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then plunged us into darkness. "Oh, God," Frank whispered. "It's happening again." In the pitch black, I heard something, a scraping sound like nails on wood coming from the far corner of the room. It was getting louder, closer. "What is that?" I hissed. "I don't know." Frank's voice was shaking. "I've never seen it. I only hear— Oh, Jesus, we need to get out of here." I felt him grab my arm, pulling me towards where I thought the door was. The scraping was all around us now, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We stumbled out into the parking lot, the cool night air hitting us like a slap. The lights were out everywhere, the motel, the street lamps, even the moon seemed to have disappeared behind thick clouds. "My car," I gasped. "We need to go." We ran towards where I'd parked, fumbling in the darkness. I clicked my key fob desperately, relief washing over me as I heard the chirp and saw the headlights flash. Just as we reached the car, I heard Frank cry out. I turned to see him being dragged backwards by something. In the brief illumination of my headlights, I caught a glimpse of a dark, writhing mass, too many limbs, too many teeth. I stood frozen, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. Frank's eyes locked with mine, wide with terror. "Go!" he screamed. "Get out of here! Don't let it take you, too!" I wish I could say I did something heroic, that I fought off the creature, that I saved Frank. But the truth is, I ran. I jumped in my car and I drove, tires squealing as I peeled out of that parking lot. I drove all night, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and my gas tank was nearly empty. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? Sometimes I managed to convince myself it was all a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too many hours on the road. But on dark nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I remember Frank's eyes, the sound of that unearthly growl, and I wonder, what if I had stayed? What if I had tried to help? These days, I don't do much traveling. When I do, I stick to well-lit chain hotels in busy areas. And no matter how tired I am, no matter how long I've been driving, I never ever stop at roadside motels with flickering vacancy signs, because sometimes a vacancy is better left unfilled. Story 6. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a pair of California plates. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed the erratic swerving tracks leading up to the parked car. Something wasn't right. 15 years on the job, and you develop a sixth sense for these things. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. I'm initiating a traffic stop on Highway 16, mile marker 37. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of my patrol car, the gravel crunching under my boots. My hand instinctively rested on my holster as I approached the vehicle. Its engine was still running, a low hum barely audible over the sound of crickets in the nearby fields. "Driver, please turn off your engine and step out of the vehicle with your hands where I can see them," I called out, my voice steady despite the unease growing in my gut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the driver's door creaked open. A man stumbled out, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He was middle-aged, wearing a rumpled suit that had seen better days. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around wildly. "Evening, officer," he slurred, swaying slightly. "Is there a problem?" I kept my distance, flashlight trained on him. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" He shook his head vigorously, then seemed to regret the motion. No, just tired. Long drive, you know?" I nodded, not believing him for a second. "I'm going to need you to perform a few sobriety tests for me, all right?" As I guided him through the tests, my unease grew. His behavior was erratic, but not in the way I typically associated with drunk driving. There was a nervous energy about him, his eyes constantly flicking back to his car. "Sir, I'm going to need you to open your trunk for me," I said, my suspicion mounting. His face paled. "The trunk? Why? I haven't done anything wrong." "It's just a routine check, sir. Please open the trunk." He hesitated, then shuffled towards the back of the car. I followed closely, my hand still resting on my holster. As he fumbled with the keys, I noticed his hands were shaking. The trunk popped open with a soft click. At first glance, it seemed empty, just a spare tire and some old newspapers. But then I saw it. A scratch mark on the inside of the trunk lid, fresh, and another on the side panel. My flashlight beam caught something else, a tiny droplet of red on the edge of the trunk. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding. It was blood. And that's when I heard it. A muffled thump, coming from inside the trunk. I snapped upright, drawing my weapon in one fluid motion. "Step away from the vehicle now," I shouted. The man's face contorted with panic. He lunged at me, catching me off guard. We grappled for a moment, my flashlight clattering to the ground. In the struggle, I felt something hard press against my ribs. A gun. I managed to twist away, bringing my own weapon to bear. "Freeze!" I yelled. "Hands where I can see them." He stood there, panting, a small revolver clutched in his trembling hand. "You don't understand," he gasped. I had to do it. They were going to ruin everything. "Drop the weapon," I ordered, my voice firm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Do it now." For a heartbeat, I thought he might comply. Then his face hardened and he raised the gun. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. The man stumbled backward, his revolver falling from limp fingers. He collapsed against the car and slid to the ground, leaving a smear of blood on the fender. I approached cautiously, kicking the revolver away before checking for a pulse. Nothing. My hands shook as I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, shots fired at my location. Suspect down. I need immediate backup and paramedics." As soon as the words left my mouth, I heard it again, that muffled thump from the trunk. With the immediate threat neutralized, my focus snapped back to what or who was trapped inside. I hurried to the trunk, using my flashlight to locate the emergency release lever. As I pulled it, I sent up a silent prayer, hoping against hope that I wasn't too late. The trunk lid sprang open, and I found myself staring into the terrified eyes of a young woman. She was bound and gagged, her face streaked with tears and mascara. The relief in her eyes when she saw my uniform was palpable. "It's okay," I said softly, reaching in to remove the gag. "You're safe now. I'm Officer Reyes. Can you tell me your name?" Amanda," she choked out between sobs. "Amanda Cortez. Please, my husband, is he—" I glanced back at the motionless figure on the ground, then at Amanda's left hand. There was a tan line where a wedding ring should have been. "I'm so sorry, Amanda," I said gently as I worked to untie her bonds. "Can you tell me what happened?" She nodded, taking a shuddering breath. "We were at a party, business associates of his. I overheard him talking about embezzlement, cooking the books. When I confronted him later, he just snapped. As I helped her out of the trunk, I could see bruises forming on her arms and face. My jaw clenched in anger. How could someone do this to their own spouse? In the distance, I could hear the wail of approaching sirens. "Help is on the way," I assured her, draping a shock blanket from my patrol car over her shoulders. "You're going to be all right." As we waited for backup to arrive, Amanda's story spilled out in bits and pieces. Her husband, David, had been siphoning money from his company for years. The party tonight was supposed to be a celebration. He had finally gathered enough to disappear, start a new life somewhere tropical. But Amanda had stumbled upon the truth. When she'd threatened to expose him, he'd attacked her, knocking her unconscious and throwing her in the trunk. He was planning to drive them both over the state line, where he had a private plane waiting. "I thought I was going to die in there," she whispered, her eyes distant. "If you hadn't stopped him." I squeezed her shoulder gently. "But I did. You're safe now." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics arrived to treat Amanda and pronounce David dead at the scene. Detectives swarmed the area, documenting evidence and taking statements. I recounted the events of the night more times than I could count. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, I found myself sitting on the hood of my patrol car, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The crime scene techs were finishing up, and soon the wrecker would arrive to tow David's car away. Amanda had been taken to the hospital for a more thorough examination, but not before thanking me profusely. "You saved my life," she'd said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." I just nodded, telling her it was all part of the job. But the truth was, nights like this were why I'd become a cop in the first place. To protect those who couldn't protect themselves. To be there in someone's darkest hour and help them find the light again. As I watched the sun climb higher in the sky, I couldn't help but think about how close it had been. If I hadn't noticed those swerving tracks, if I hadn't picked up on David's nervous behavior, if I'd been a fraction of a second slower in drawing my weapon, any one of those things could have led to a very different outcome. My sergeant approached, his face grave. "Hell of a night, Reyes," he said, leaning against the car next to me. "You did good work out here. Saved that woman's life." I nodded, taking another sip of my now cold coffee. "Just doing my job, Sarge." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Take the rest of the day off, get some rest. I'll need your incident report on my desk first thing tomorrow." As he walked away, I let out a long breath, feeling the tension of the night finally begin to ebb away. I knew the coming days would be filled with paperwork, questioning, and probably a mandatory psych eval. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. I'd made a difference tonight. I'd saved a life. And in this job, sometimes that's all you can ask for. I slid off the hood of my car and tossed my empty coffee cup in a nearby evidence bag. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I took one last look at the scene. The rising sun had burned away the last of the night's shadows, revealing a stretch of highway that looked utterly ordinary. But I knew better. I knew that on this unremarkable stretch of road, a woman's life had been saved and a criminal's plans had been thwarted. It was a reminder of why I put on this uniform every day, why I was willing to face danger and uncertainty. Because sometimes being in the right place at the right time can change everything. And tonight, that's exactly what had happened. Story 7. The moment I saw his thumb jutting out from the roadside, I knew I'd regret stopping. But on a night like this, with the rain coming down in sheets and visibility near zero, I couldn't just drive by. Little did I know that single decision would turn my routine haul into a nightmare I'd never forget. My name's Earl, and I've been driving big rigs for going on 30 years now. I've seen my fair share of strange things out on the lonely highways, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that stormy night on Route 66. It was coming up on 2 a.m., and I'd been on the road for nearly 14 hours straight. The coffee in my thermos had long since gone cold, and my eyes were starting to play tricks on me. Every shadow seemed to move, every reflective sign a pair of watching eyes. That's when I saw him, a lone figure standing in the glow of my headlights, arm outstretched. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to a thin frame. Against my better judgment, I eased off the accelerator and pulled onto the shoulder. As I watched him approach in my side mirror, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. There was something off about the way he moved, a kind of nervous energy that set my teeth on edge. I lowered the passenger window a crack. "Where you headed, friend?" He leaned in, and I got my first good look at his face. Young guy, probably mid-20s, with deep-set eyes that darted around nervously. "Next town over, if it's not too much trouble. Got caught in this storm, something fierce." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive on, to leave this stranger in my rear view. But the pelting rain and the memory of my own son about this guy's age and away at college made me soften. "Hop in," I said, against my better judgment. "But I gotta warn you, I don't make many stops. Got a schedule to keep." He nodded eagerly, yanking open the door and clambering up into the cab. As he settled into the passenger seat, I caught a whiff of something metallic underneath the smell of rain and sweat. It reminded me of the time I'd hit a deer on a back road in Pennsylvania, the sharp, coppery scent of fresh blood. We rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound. I could feel him staring at me, but every time I glanced over, he'd quickly look away. Finally, I couldn't take the tension anymore. "So what brings you out to these parts? Not exactly prime hitchhiking territory." He shifted in his seat, hands fidgeting in his lap. "Oh, just trying to get home. Took a wrong turn, ended up way off course." Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His voice was too casual, like he was reading lines from a script. I was about to press further when he suddenly stiffened, eyes locked on the side mirror. "Hey, is that cop following us?" I checked my mirrors. Sure enough, there was a car about a quarter-mile back, headlights piercing through the rain. It was hard to make out details, but the silhouette did look like it could be a patrol car. "Probably just a state trooper doing his rounds," I said, trying to keep my voice even. But as I watched, the car started to gain on us, its lights growing brighter in the mirror. My passenger's breathing had quickened, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest. "Listen, man," he said, his voice tight with panic. "I need you to pull over. Right now." Warning bells were going off in my head now. I tightened my grip on the wheel, mind racing. Who the hell had I let into my truck? "Look, buddy," I started to say, but he cut me off. I said, "Pull over." His voice had risen to a shout, and when I glanced over, my blood ran cold. He had a knife in his hand, a wicked-looking blade that glinted in the dim light of the dashboard. I eased off the accelerator, guiding the big rig onto the shoulder. The tires rumbled over the grooved pavement, and I felt the trailer fishtail slightly in the rain. As soon as we came to a stop, he was scrambling for the door handle. But before he could get it open, a spotlight blazed through the passenger window, so bright it was almost blinding. "Police! Step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them." The voice boomed from a loudspeaker, cutting through the sound of rain and idling engine. My passenger froze, knife still clutched in his trembling hand. "It's over, man," I said quietly. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a long moment, he just sat there, chest heaving, then slowly he lowered the knife. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Before I could respond, the passenger door was yanked open. Two officers, raincoats gleaming in the spotlights, reached in and hauled him out. I watched in the mirror as they cuffed him and led him to the waiting patrol car. A knock on my window made me jump. Another officer stood there, gesturing for me to roll down the window. "You all right, sir?" he asked, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Yeah, I'm okay. What's going on? Who is that guy? The officer's face was grim. His name's Jason Corliss. He's wanted in connection with a double homicide 2 counties over. Been on the run for the past 36 hours. The words hit me like a physical blow. A murderer. I'd picked up a goddamn murderer. Listen, the officer continued. We're going to need you to come down to the station to give a statement, but first I need to ask, did he say anything to you? Anything about where he's been or where he was headed? I shook my head, still trying to process everything. No, he didn't say much. Just that he was trying to get home. The officer nodded, jotting something in a small notebook. All right, follow us to the station and we'll get your statement. As he walked away, I sat there for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. I'd been alone in my truck with a killer, separated by mere inches from someone capable of taking a life. I glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see the knife still lying there. But it was empty save for a damp patch where he'd been sitting. With shaking hands, I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, following the flashing lights of the police cruiser. As I drove, my mind raced with all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't stopped? What if he'd decided to use that knife? What if the police hadn't shown up when they did? The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. I'd always prided myself on being a good judge of character, on trusting my gut. But tonight, that instinct had nearly gotten me killed. As we pulled into the police station parking lot, I made a silent vow. No more hitchhikers, no more Good Samaritan acts. From now on, it was just me, my rig, and the open road. The next few hours passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and endless questions. I told my story over and over to the desk sergeant, to a detective, to a sketch artist who wanted every detail of the knife I'd seen. By the time they finally let me go, the sun was peeking over the horizon. I stumbled out of the station, squinting in the pale morning light. My truck sat where I'd left it, a hulking silhouette in the empty parking lot. As I climbed up into the cab, I paused, my hand on the door handle. For the first time in 30 years of driving, the thought of getting back on the road filled me with dread. The highway suddenly seemed like a dangerous, unpredictable place full of hidden threats and close calls. But I had a job to do, cargo to deliver. And more than that, I had my pride. I wasn't about to let one bad night end my career. I settled into the driver's seat, the familiar creaks and groans of the truck oddly comforting. As I turned the key, the engine rumbled to life, a steady pulse that seemed to say, "It's okay. You're safe now." Pulling out of the lot, I merged onto the highway, the rising sun at my back. The events of the night replayed in my mind, but with each mile that passed, they seemed to lose some of their power over me. I was Earl the trucker, a road warrior with 3 decades of experience under my belt. I'd faced down blizzards and bandits, mechanical failures and midnight deadlines, and I'd faced down a killer and lived to tell the tale. As the miles rolled by and the sun climbed higher in the sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The open road stretched out before me, full of possibility and adventure. And for the first time since I'd picked up that rain-soaked hitchhiker, I smiled. Let the highway throw its worst at me. I'd weathered this storm, and I'd weather the next one too, because that's what truckers do. We keep on driving no matter what. With that thought, I pressed down on the accelerator, the big rig responding with a satisfying surge of power. The nightmare was behind me now. Ahead lay nothing but open road and the promise of home. Story 8. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. But as I sat in my patrol car that night, watching the dash cam footage loop for the 100th time, I realized it's not your life you see. It's all the mistakes that led you to that moment. My name is Officer Sarah Chen, and this was supposed to be my last night on patrol before a well-deserved vacation. 12 hours of cruising the empty highways that crisscross our rural county, then 2 weeks of sun, sand, and forgetting about the badge for a while. That was the plan, anyway. The night started like any other. I clocked in at the station, chatted with dispatch, and hit the road. It was a cool autumn evening, leaves skittering across the asphalt in my headlights. The radio crackled with the usual chatter, a couple of noise complaints in town, a fender bender on Main Street. Nothing major. Around midnight, I was patrolling a stretch of Highway 27, a long, lonely road that cuts through miles of cornfields. Most nights you'd be lucky to see more than a handful of cars out here. That's why the speeding sedan caught my attention. It came out of nowhere, blowing past me going at least 30 over the limit. I flipped on my lights and sirens, pulling out to give chase. The car, a dark-colored sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, didn't slow down. If anything, it seemed to speed up. I radioed in the pursuit. "Dispatch, this is Officer Chen. I'm in pursuit of a speeding vehicle on Highway 27 heading north, requesting backup." "Copy that, Officer Chen. Backup is en route. Be advised, we're getting some interference on your signal. Can you confirm your location?" I frowned. Interference wasn't uncommon out here, but something in the dispatcher's tone made me uneasy. "I'm about 5 miles north of the Jackson Creek Bridge," I replied. "Suspect vehicle is not slowing down. I'm going to attempt a traffic stop." As if hearing my words, the sedan suddenly decelerated, pulling over to the shoulder. I stopped about 20 feet behind it, angling my car slightly for protection. Standard procedure. "Dispatch, suspect vehicle has stopped. I'm approaching now." I stepped out of my cruiser, one hand resting on my holstered weapon. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the tick-tick-tick of my hazard lights and the low rumble of the sedan's engine. "Driver, turn off your engine and place your hands where I can see them," I called out, using my flashlight to illuminate the car's interior. No response, no movement. I took a step closer. "Driver, I repeat, turn off your engine and show me your hands." Still nothing. My unease grew. Something wasn't right here, that's when I noticed it. A hand. It was reaching up from the back seat, pale and slender in the beam of my flashlight. It moved slowly, deliberately towards the driver's headrest. My heart rate spiked. "Driver, there's someone in your back seat. Get out of the car now." The hand froze. For a moment, everything was still. Then all hell broke loose. The back door of the sedan flew open with such force it should have come off its hinges. A figure burst out, tall, unnaturally thin, moving with a speed that didn't seem human. I stumbled backward, drawing my weapon. "Stop! Police!" The figure ignored me, sprinting towards the cornfield on the other side of the highway. I fired a warning shot into the air, but it didn't even flinch. In a matter of seconds, it had disappeared into the corn. My hands were shaking as I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I need immediate backup. Suspect fled on foot into the field east of my location. Possible hostage situation. I'm going to check on the driver." I approached the sedan cautiously, gun still drawn. The driver's side door was ajar. I pulled it open, bracing myself for what I might find. Empty. The entire car was empty, but that was impossible. I'd seen the driver. I'd seen the hand from the back seat. Where had they gone? A noise from the cornfield made me whirl around, heart pounding. The plants were rustling, something moving through them towards me. "This is the police," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come out with your hands up." The rustling grew louder, closer. I raised my weapon, finger on the trigger. A figure burst from the corn, but it wasn't the tall, thin shape I'd seen before. This was a man, middle-aged, balding, wearing a torn business suit. He stumbled towards me, eyes wide with terror. "Officer, thank God!" he gasped. "You have to help me, it's still out there." I kept my gun trained on him. "Sir, stop right there and put your hands where I can see them." He complied, but his eyes kept darting back to the cornfield. "Please, you don't understand. We have to go. Now, sir, I need you to calm down and explain what's happening. Are you the driver of this vehicle?" He nodded frantically. Yes. Listen, I was driving home from a late meeting. I must have dozed off for a second because the next thing I knew there was something in my back seat. It made me drive out here. I thought I was going to die, A chill ran down my spine. His story matched what I'd seen, but it was too fantastic to be true. And yet, "Officer Chen, do you copy?" My radio crackled to life, making us both jump. "What's your status?" I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, I'm with a male subject who claims to be the driver. No sign of the other suspect. We're going to need—" My words were cut off by an inhuman shriek from the cornfield. The man screamed, diving behind me. "It's here!" he yelled. "Oh God, it's here!" I raised my weapon, scanning the field. The corn was swaying violently now, something large moving through it at incredible speed. It was circling us, getting closer with each pass. "Get in my car," I shouted to the man. "Now!" We ran for the patrol car. I could hear it behind us, getting closer. The man reached the passenger side, yanking on the handle. "It's locked," he cried. I fumbled for my keys, my hands slick with sweat. Almost there. Almost. Something hit me from behind hard. I sprawled onto the asphalt, my gun skittering away. I rolled over, looking up into a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was humanoid, but wrong in every way. Limbs too long, joints bent at impossible angles. Its skin was pale and translucent, pulsing with an inner light. But its eyes, God, its eyes, black as pitch and filled with an intelligence that was utterly alien. It leaned in close, studying me with those terrible eyes. I could feel its breath on my face, cold as a winter wind. My body wouldn't respond, paralyzed by fear or something else. Then, in a voice that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind, it said, "Not yet." And just like that, it was gone. Vanished as if it had never been there. I don't know how long I lay there on the road. It could have been seconds or hours. The next thing I remember clearly is the arrival of backup, red and blue lights painting the night, voices shouting questions I couldn't begin to answer. They found the man, the driver, huddled in the ditch by the side of the road. His story matched mine, not that it made either of us sound any less crazy. The official report calls it a violent carjacking. The dashcam footage shows a blur leaving the sedan, but nothing clear. No sign of the thing I saw. The higher-ups were all too happy to sweep the whole incident under the rug. Swamp gas, weather balloons, mass hallucination, take your pick. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And I know it's still out there. I never did take that vacation. How could I, knowing what I know now? Instead, I requested a transfer to the night shift. Every night I patrol that stretch of Highway 27, watching, waiting, because it said not yet, and that means it's coming back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And when it does, I'll be ready. At least that's what I tell myself as I sit here in my patrol car watching the corn sway in the midnight breeze, jumping at every shadow. But deep down, I know the truth. None of us are ready for what's out there in the dark. Story 9. The first crack of thunder made me jump, my hands tightening on the steering wheel as rain began to pelt the windshield. I squinted through the deluge, barely able to make out the road ahead. That's when I saw it, a flickering neon sign cutting through the darkness. Pinewood Motel, it read, the E in a motel flickering ominously. Thank God. My wife Lisa murmured from the passenger seat. I don't think we can drive much further in this weather. I nodded, relief washing over me as I carefully steered our sedan into the motel's nearly empty parking lot. Only 2 other cars were present, an old pickup truck and a sedan that had seen better days. As I cut the engine, another boom of thunder shook the car. Lisa and I exchanged glances before making a mad dash for the office, the rain soaking us in seconds. A bell jingled as we burst through the door, dripping water onto the worn linoleum floor. Behind a cluttered desk sat an elderly man, his rheumy eyes regarding us with mild interest. "Evening, folks," he drawled. "Nasty night to be out." "You're telling me," I replied, pushing my wet hair out of my eyes. "You wouldn't happen to have a room available, would you?" He nodded slowly, reaching for a ledger. "Got plenty. Not many folks stopping by these days." He quoted us a price that seemed suspiciously low, but given our situation, I wasn't about to argue. As he handed over the key, an actual metal key, not a key card, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered a bit too long, or the eerie silence that seemed to permeate the office despite the storm raging outside. "Room 13, he said, his lips curling into what might have been a smile. "End of the row. Enjoy your stay." The rain had let up slightly as Lisa and I made our way to the room, our shoes squelching with each step. The key stuck in the lock for a moment before turning with a loud click. The room that greeted us was straight out of the 1970s. Faded floral wallpaper, a garish orange bedspread, and a TV that looked older than I was. But it was dry, and right now that was all that mattered. "Home sweet home," Lisa said with a weak laugh, dropping her overnight bag on the bed. I forced a smile, trying to shake off my unease. "I'm going to grab our other bag from the car. Be right back, Al." The rain had picked up again by the time I returned, soaked to the bone once more. As I closed the door behind me, a particularly loud clap of thunder made the lights flicker. "Did you hear that?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide. I frowned. "The thunder?" She shook her head. "No, it sounded like, I don't know, a scream, maybe, coming from next door." I listened intently, but all I could hear was the pounding of rain on the roof. I'm sure it was just the wind, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. This place doesn't exactly look soundproof. Lisa nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. We tried to settle in for the night, the ancient TV offering only static-filled channels. Every now and then I could swear I heard strange noises, shuffling footsteps, muffled voices, but each time I checked, the walkway outside our room was empty. It was nearing midnight when a loud thump from the room next door made us both jump. "Okay, that wasn't the wind," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. I stood up, moving towards the door. "I'm going to check it out." Lisa grabbed my arm. "Be careful." I stepped outside, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my skin. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the dripping of water from the roof. I approached the next room, my heart pounding in my chest. As I raised my hand to knock, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was slightly ajar. "Hello," I called out, pushing the door open wider. "Everything okay in here?" The room was dark, but I could make out shapes in the gloom. The bed was unmade, clothes strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry. But what caught my eye was a dark stain on the carpet near the bathroom. My hand fumbled for the light switch, flicking it on to reveal a scene that made my stomach lurch. The stain was blood, a trail of it leading into the bathroom. I stepped back, my mind reeling. This was bad, very bad. I needed to get Lisa, get to our car, and get the hell out of here. As I turned to leave, movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Slowly, I turned back towards the room. The closet door was open now. I was certain it had been closed before. And there, in the shadows, I saw a pair of eyes gleaming in the darkness. I ran. Bursting back into our room, I slammed the door shut, fumbling with the flimsy lock. "We need to leave, now," I gasped. Lisa jumped up, her face pale. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I said, grabbing our bags. "But something's very wrong here. We need to go." As we stepped outside, I realized with growing horror that the parking lot was empty. Our car was gone. "This isn't possible," I muttered, spinning around. The pickup truck and old sedan we'd seen earlier had vanished as well. A sound behind us made us both whirl around. The old man from the office was standing there, that same unsettling smile on his face. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Where's our car?" I demanded, pushing Lisa behind me. The old man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. Now," he said, taking a step towards us. "The fun's just getting started." Suddenly, doors began to open all along the row of rooms. Dark figures emerged, their movements jerky and unnatural. They began to advance, closing in around us. Lisa's scream pierced the night as we ran, our feet pounding on the wet asphalt. But no matter how fast we moved, the motel seemed to stretch endlessly before us, the exit always just out of reach. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that eventually we found ourselves back where we started, in front of room 13. The old man was waiting for us, that terrible smile still plastered on his face. "Welcome back," he said. "We've been expecting you." As the dark figures closed in around us, I realized with a sinking feeling that we had never truly arrived at the Pinewood Motel. We had simply ceased to exist anywhere else. The last thing I remember is the sound of that bell jingling as the office door swung shut, sealing our fate forever. I blinked, disoriented. We were back in our car, the windshield wipers battling against the pouring rain. Ahead, a neon sign flickered in the darkness. Pinewood Motel, it read. "Look," Lisa said, pointing. "Maybe we can stop there for the night." I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. "No," I said firmly, pressing down on the accelerator. "We keep driving." As we passed the motel, I caught a glimpse of an old man watching us from the office window. For a moment, I thought I saw him smile, but then we were past, the motel disappearing into the rainy night behind us. I didn't relax until it was completely out of sight, hidden by the curve of the road and the veil of rain. Lisa gave me a curious look. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, my hand still gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired. Let's find somewhere else to stay." As we drove on into the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped something terrible, something that was still out there, waiting for unwary travelers in the night. I made a silent vow never to stop at a roadside motel again. Sometimes it's better to keep driving no matter how dark the night or how fierce the storm, because you never know what might be waiting behind those flickering neon signs and numbered doors. The rain continued to fall as we drove on, leaving the Pinewood Motel and whatever secrets it held far behind us. But in my mind, I could still hear that bell jingling, still see that old man's unsettling smile. And I knew that somewhere out there in the vastness of the night, the Pinewood Motel was waiting. Always waiting for the next unsuspecting guest to check in. But it wouldn't be us. Not tonight. Not ever. Story 10. The scrape of metal on metal echoed through the darkness, sending a chill down my spine. I froze, my hand still on the wrench I'd been using to tighten a bolt on the new guardrail. In the 15 years I'd been working highway construction, I'd never heard a sound quite like that. It was almost human, and it was coming from somewhere beneath my feet. My name's Ray, and I thought I knew every inch of this stretch of Highway 275. But on that muggy July night, as I finished up a late shift, I discovered there were secrets hidden beneath the asphalt I'd never dreamed of. The day had started like any other. I'd clocked in at 4 p.m., just as the sun was starting its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin and leaves you feeling like you're breathing through a wet sponge. We'd been working on this section of the highway for weeks, widening the shoulder and installing new guardrails. It was tedious work, but necessary. This particular stretch had seen its fair share of accidents over the years, and we were determined to make it safer. As night fell, most of the crew packed up and headed home. But I volunteered to stay late, wanting to finish up this last section of guardrail. The overtime pay would come in handy, and besides, I'd always preferred working at night. There was something peaceful about the empty highway, lit only by our floodlights and the occasional passing car. It was nearing midnight when I first noticed something odd. I was gathering up my tools, ready to call it a night, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But there it was again, a shadow darting between two pieces of heavy machinery. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Someone there. No response, just the hum of the floodlights and the distant rush of sparse traffic. I shook my head, chalking it up to exhaustion. But as I turned back to my work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That's when I heard it, that bone-chilling scrape of metal on metal. It seemed to be coming from beneath the newly laid asphalt, impossibly deep. I stood stock still, hardly daring to breathe. There it was again, louder this time. And was it my imagination, or did I hear something else underneath? A voice? Sweat trickled down my back as I slowly set down my wrench and reached for my flashlight. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get out of there, to call someone, anyone. But curiosity, that damned human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the ground, searching for, I don't know what, a trapdoor? A hidden entrance? All I saw was smooth black asphalt, still faintly warm from the day's heat. Then I saw it, a manhole cover, partially hidden by a stack of orange safety cones. It was old, the metal corroded and covered in rust. How had I never noticed it before? As I approached, the scraping sound came again, definitely emanating from beneath the cover. And this time I was sure I heard a voice, muffled, desperate, calling for help. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct told me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But if someone was down there, trapped and in need of help. With shaking hands, I reached for the manhole cover. It was heavy, years of rust making it resistant to my efforts. But adrenaline lent me strength, and slowly, painfully, I managed to slide it aside. The smell hit me first, damp and musty, with an underlying stench of decay that made my stomach churn. I pointed my flashlight down into the darkness, revealing a rusty ladder descending into what looked like an old maintenance tunnel. "Hello?" I called down, my voice echoing in the confined space. "Is someone down there?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, came a reply. "Help, please." I hesitated, torn between the urge to help and the very real fear of what might be waiting in that darkness. In the end, duty won out. I couldn't leave someone down there, no matter how much every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run. Gripping my flashlight tightly, I began to descend the ladder. Each rung creaked ominously under my weight, and I silently prayed the whole thing wouldn't come crashing down. As I reached the bottom, I swept my light around, trying to get my bearings. I was in a circular chamber with tunnels branching off in 3 directions. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was thick and hard to breathe. "Where are you?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Here. Down here." The voice was coming from the leftmost tunnel. I started down the passageway, my footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning. I tried to keep track of the turns, knowing I'd need to find my way back, but it was hopeless. I was thoroughly lost. Just as I was about to give up and turn back, I emerged into another chamber. This one was larger, filled with rusted machinery whose purpose I couldn't even begin to guess. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, or at least it had been once. Now it was something else. Its skin was pale and waxy, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. And its limbs, they seemed too long, joints bending at impossible angles. It turned to face me, and I saw its mouth open in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Thank you for coming," it said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We've been so hungry." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the damp wall of the tunnel. As I watched in horror, more figures began to emerge from the shadows, dozens of them, all with the same elongated limbs and hungry eyes. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning as I gasped for air in the fetid tunnel. I could hear them behind me, their unnatural movements creating a cacophony of scrapes and thuds that echoed off the walls. Left, right, another left. I had no idea if I was heading in the right direction. All I knew was that I had to get out, had to reach the surface before those things caught up to me. By some miracle, I saw a faint glow ahead, moonlight streaming down through the open manhole. With a final burst of speed, I reached the ladder and began to climb, practically throwing myself up the rungs. I emerged onto the highway, gasping and retching. Without pausing to catch my breath, I slammed the manhole cover back into place and began piling everything I could find on top of it. Tools, safety cones, chunks of concrete. Only when I'd created a mountain of debris did I finally allow myself to collapse, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and fear. As I sat there, trying to process what I'd just experienced, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Sirens growing closer by the second, and then cutting through the night, a voice over a loudspeaker. "This is the police. Step away from the construction equipment and put your hands where we can see them." I looked up to see several patrol cars pulling up, officers emerging with weapons drawn. In that moment, I realized how this must look. A crazed man covered in dirt and sweat, destroying property in the middle of the night. As they approached, weapons trained on me, I tried to find the words to explain what had happened, but how could I? Who would believe me? "Officers," I managed to croak out, my throat raw from screaming. "You don't understand. There's something down there, something not human." One of the officers, a grizzled veteran by the looks of him, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and tell me exactly what happened here." So I told them. Everything. The sounds, the tunnel, the creatures. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the sideways glances they exchanged. They thought I was crazy, high on drugs maybe, but the older officer, there was something in his expression. Not belief exactly, but not total dismissal either. "Johnson," he barked at one of the younger cops, "get on the radio. Tell them we need a hazmat team out here ASAP, full containment protocols." As the officer hurried to comply, the veteran turned back to me. "Son," he said, his voice low, "I don't know what you saw down there. But I've been on this force for 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. You understand?" I nodded, relief washing over me. They might not believe my story, but at least they were taking it seriously. As I was led to one of the patrol cars, I couldn't help but glance back at the manhole cover, now hidden beneath the pile of debris. Whatever was down there, I hoped it would stay buried, a secret of the highway never to see the light of day. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That someday, somehow, those creatures would find their way to the surface. And when they did, God help us all. Story 11. I've always prided myself on being a good judge of character. It's a skill that served me well in life, from business deals to friendships. But on that rainy night on Highway 16, my judgment failed me spectacularly. And it nearly cost me everything. The day had started normally enough. I was driving back from a business conference in Portland, looking forward to getting home to Seattle. The rain had been relentless since I left, turning the world beyond my windshield into a gray blur. I was making good time despite the weather, my trusty sedan eating up the miles as classic rock kept me company. It was just past sunset when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, hunched against the driving rain. In any other circumstance, I would have driven right by. I'm not the kind of person who picks up hitchhikers. It's dangerous, irresponsible. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was standing, slightly stooped as if carrying an invisible weight. Maybe it was the fact that he looked so out of place on this lonely stretch of highway. Or maybe I was just tired of my own company after hours of solitary driving. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling over onto the gravel shoulder, windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm. As the man jogged towards my car, I had a moment of panic. What was I doing? This went against everything I believed about personal safety. But before I could change my mind and drive off, he was at the passenger door. I leaned over and opened it, getting my first good look at my new traveling companion. He was younger than I expected, probably in his late 20s, shaggy brown hair plastered to his forehead, a scruffy beard, and clothes that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, deep-set and intense, darting around nervously. "Thanks, man," he said, sliding into the seat. "You're a lifesaver." The smell of wet clothes and something else, sweat, fear, filled the car. I tried not to wrinkle my nose as I pulled back onto the highway. "No problem," I replied, aiming for casual. "Where you headed?" "North," he said vaguely. "As far as you're going is fine." I nodded, focused on the road ahead. An uncomfortable silence settled over us. "I'm Mark," I offered, more to break the quiet than out of any real desire to know him. He hesitated for a beat too long before responding. "Jack, nice to meet you, Mark." Something about the way he said it made me glance over. He was staring straight ahead, his body tense. A warning bell went off in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. I was just being paranoid. "So, Jack," I said, "what brings you out to this lovely stretch of highway on such a beautiful evening?" He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Just needed a change of scenery, you know?" I didn't, but I nodded anyway. Sure. We all need that sometimes. More silence." I fiddled with the radio, trying to find a station that would come in clearly through the storm. As I did, a news bulletin caught my attention. Still searching for escaped convict James Lawson. Lawson, who was serving time for armed robbery, overpowered a guard during transport and is believed to be heading north. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. If spotted, do not approach. I felt the blood drain from my face. Slowly, trying not to be obvious, I glanced at Jack. He was staring at the radio, his face a mask of tension. "Crazy stuff, huh?" I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "Seems like there's always some maniac on the loose these days." Jack grunted in response, shifting in his seat. His hand moved to the bag at his feet, and I saw something that made my heart stop. The edge of what looked like a prison-issued jumpsuit poking out from under his jacket. Oh God, what had I done? My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this situation. Should I confront him? Try to casually pull over at the next gas station? My palms were sweating on the steering wheel as I weighed my options. Jack must have sensed my unease. "You okay there, Mark? You're looking a little pale." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just long day of driving, you know? Actually, I think I might need to stop soon, get some coffee, stretch my legs." His eyes narrowed slightly. "We just got on the road. Surely you can go a bit further." The implied threat in his voice was clear. I swallowed hard. "Right, of course, my mistake." We drove on in tense silence. I kept my eyes on the road, hyper-aware of every move Jack made. He seemed to be wrestling with something, his hand repeatedly moving towards his bag before pulling back. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Jack spoke again. Look, I know you heard that radio bulletin. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was it. I braced myself for whatever was coming next, but what he said next surprised me. I'm not who they say I am. It's not what you think. I didn't respond, afraid that anything I said might set him off. He continued, his words coming faster now. I was set up. My cellmate, he had connections. Said he could get me out if I took the fall for something. I didn't know it would be like this. Despite my fear, I found myself curious. What do you mean? Jack ran a hand through his damp hair. The guard, the one they say I overpowered, he was in on it. It was all staged. But then things went wrong. He wasn't supposed to get hurt, but he trailed off, lost in the memory. I waited, barely breathing. I panicked, he finally continued. I ran, and now I don't know what to do. I weighed my next words carefully. Why are you telling me this? He looked at me then, and I saw raw desperation in his eyes. Because I need help, and because I'm tired of running. Part of me wanted to believe him. The story was just crazy enough to be true. But another part, the rational part, screamed that this was exactly what a desperate fugitive would say to gain sympathy. Before I could respond, blue and red lights flashed in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser was behind us, siren wailing. Jack tensed. Please, he whispered. Please don't. I had a choice to make, and only seconds to make it. Everything I knew about safety, about right and wrong, told me to pull over, to turn this man, this criminal, over to the authorities. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But as I looked at Jack, saw the fear and desperation in his eyes, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I pressed down on the accelerator. The next few minutes were a blur of screeching tires and sharp turns. I drove like I'd never driven before, taking back roads and shortcuts I didn't even know I remembered. Somehow, miraculously, we lost the police car. When I finally pulled over, hidden behind an abandoned barn miles from the highway, we both sat in stunned silence, our breathing ragged. Why? Jack finally asked. Why did you do that? I shook my head, still not quite believing it myself. I don't know, I guess I decided to trust my gut, to trust you. He nodded slowly. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Don't thank me yet, I replied. We're not out of this. What's your plan? Jack looked lost. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I sighed, my mind already working on our next move. Okay, here's what we're going to do. The next few days were a whirlwind of close calls and calculated risks. We ditched my car using cash to buy a beaten-up old truck. Jack told me everything about the setup, about the people who had orchestrated his escape and subsequent framing. Together, we gathered evidence, made careful phone calls, and slowly built a case. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I was sure we'd be caught, when every shadow looked like a police officer and every passing car sounded like a siren. But somehow, we made it through. In the end, Jack turned himself in on his own terms with a lawyer present and evidence in hand. The truth came out, revealing a web of corruption that went far beyond a single prison break. As for me, well, let's just say my life took an unexpected turn. These days, I work with a non-profit organization that helps exonerate wrongfully convicted individuals. It's challenging work, often heartbreaking, but incredibly rewarding. Sometimes I think back to that rainy night on Highway 16. If I had driven past Jack, if I had turned him in when I heard that radio bulletin, my life would be very different now. Safer, perhaps. Simpler, definitely. But as I watch another innocent person walk free, their family crying tears of joy, I know I made the right choice. Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that take us off our planned route. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that seem the craziest at the time. And sometimes a simple act of trust can change everything. Story 12. The notification on my phone pinged, its cheerful tone a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the deserted street. Another food delivery order. I sighed, glancing at the clock on my phone. 11:43 p.m. Just one more order and I could call it a night. Little did I know this delivery would be anything but routine. I'm Alex, your average college student trying to make ends meet in the gig economy. Tonight, like most nights, I found myself pedaling through the city's darkened streets, my backpack laden with other people's dinners. The address on my screen made me pause. 1420 Warehouse Row. It was on the outskirts of town, an area I rarely ventured into, especially not at this hour, but the promise of a hefty tip and the need to pay this month's rent spurred me on. The streets grew quieter as I pedaled further from the city center. Streetlights became scarce, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. After what felt like an eternity, I arrived at my destination. The warehouse loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. No lights were visible from the outside, and the loading dock doors were shut tight. I dismounted my bike, my legs trembling slightly from the long ride. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness surrounding me. No response. Checking my phone again, I confirmed the address. This had to be the place. I walked up to what appeared to be a side door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. A small keypad gleamed in the moonlight next to the door. Just as I was about to give up and cancel the order, the keypad lit up. Numbers began to flash across the screen. 5821. Before I could process what was happening, the door clicked open. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get back on my bike and pedal away as fast as I could. But curiosity, and admittedly the promise of that tip, got the better of me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows upon rows of shelves stacked high with boxes and crates. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of long abandoned spaces. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Food delivery." No answer. I took a few tentative steps forward, my sneakers squeaking on the concrete floor. The door swung shut behind me with a resounding clang that made me jump. Heart pounding, I tried the door. Locked. Of course it was locked. I was trapped. Panic began to set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was alone in an abandoned warehouse in the middle of the night with no way out. I pulled out my phone, ready to call for help, only to see the dreaded no service message mocking me from the screen. A noise from deeper in the warehouse made me freeze. It sounded like shuffling? Footsteps? "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. No response, but the shuffling grew louder. It was coming closer. I swept my phone's flashlight around frantically, trying to locate the source of the sound. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement between the shelves. Something was in here with me. Fight or flight instinct kicking in, I chose flight. I ran deeper into the warehouse, hoping to find another exit. The shuffling followed, growing faster, more urgent. As I rounded a corner, my foot caught on something, sending me sprawling. My phone clattered across the floor, its light spinning crazily before going out, plunging me into total darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my hands outstretched, feeling my way along the shelves. The shuffling was closer now, almost upon me. In desperation, I ducked behind a large crate, trying to control my ragged breathing. For a moment, all was silent. Then a voice, low and gravelly, spoke from just inches away. "You shouldn't be here." I bit back a scream, pressing myself further against the crate. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I'm just delivering food. I'll leave, I swear." A dry chuckle. "Leave? Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible now. You've seen too much of him." "Seen what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't seen anything." Another chuckle, this one colder. "Oh, but you will." Suddenly, lights blazed to life overhead, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I found myself face to face with a man. He was older, with graying hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to bore into me. Behind him stood two others, their expressions grim. Who are you?" I stammered. "What is this place?" The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This, my young friend, is where we keep secrets. Secrets that people would kill to know, or kill to keep hidden." My mind raced. What had I stumbled into? Some kind of criminal operation? A government conspiracy? "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. I won't say anything about this place. Just let me go and you'll never see me again." The man's smile widened. "Oh, I'm quite certain we'll never see you again. But letting you go? I'm afraid that's not an option." One of the men behind him stepped forward, reaching into his jacket. I tensed, expecting to see a gun. Instead, he pulled out a folder and handed it to the older man. "You see," the older man continued, flipping open the folder, "we've been watching you for some time, Alex. Your financial struggles, your desperate need for this job, it's made you, shall we say, uniquely qualified for an opportunity." My breath caught in my throat. How did they know my name? How long had they been watching me? "What kind of opportunity?" I asked, my curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. The man's eyes gleamed. "The kind that could change your life if you're willing to take a risk." He handed me the folder. Inside were photos, surveillance photos of me on my bike making deliveries. Along with them was a contract, the text too small for me to read in the dim light. "We have a job opening," the man explained. "One that requires someone who can move unnoticed through the city, someone used to making quick, discreet deliveries." I looked up from the folder, realization dawning. "You want me to deliver secrets?" He nodded, looking pleased. "Smart boy, yes, information. Sometimes physical documents, sometimes digital, always to the right people at the right time. It's crucial work, Alex. Work that could make you very, very rich." My mind reeled. This was insane, dangerous, probably illegal, and yet the promise of financial security, of never having to worry about rent or tuition again. "What if I say no?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. The man's expression hardened. "Then I'm afraid this warehouse becomes your final delivery destination. We can't risk you talking about what you've seen here." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a choice, it was an ultimatum. "And if I say yes," his smile returned, "then you begin your training immediately. You'll learn things you never imagined, see parts of the city and the world that few ever do. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be safe, but it will be a life like no other." I looked down at the contract in my hands, then back at the man and his associates. My old life, the endless cycle of classes and late-night deliveries, seemed to stretch out before me, a path of perpetual struggle. But this was a door to a new world, a dangerous world, yes, but one full of possibilities. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. "Where do I sign?" The man's smile widened as he produced a pen from his pocket. "Welcome aboard, Alex. Your first lesson begins now. In our world, there's no such thing as a simple delivery." As I put pen to paper, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was signing away more than just my employment status. I was signing away my old life, my innocence, perhaps even my soul. But as the man shook my hand, welcoming me to a shadowy world I never knew existed, I realized something. That food delivery notification on my phone hadn't just been another order. It had been a call to adventure, a turning point that would change my life forever. And as I followed my new employers deeper into the warehouse, leaving behind the world of late-night food runs and minimum wage struggles, I couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement mixed with my fear. Whatever lay ahead, it would certainly be more interesting than delivering pizzas. The door closed behind us, sealing me into my new life. The last delivery of my old life complete, I was now the package, ready to be molded into something new, something dangerous. And somewhere in the city, a customer wondered why their food never arrived. Story 13. The moment I heard about Big Mike's abandoned rig, I knew something was terribly wrong. In 15 years of serving coffee and pie to truckers, I'd never known him to be late for a delivery, let alone leave his precious Peterbilt unattended. As I drove out to that lonely rest stop in the gathering dusk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading straight into a nightmare. Little did I know my hunch was about to prove horrifyingly accurate. My name's Darlene, and I've been slinging hash at the Starlight Diner just off I-40 since before most of these young truckers were born. It's the kind of place where everybody knows your name, your order, and probably more of your business than they should. But that's what makes it special. It's not just a diner, it's a home away from home for the road warriors who keep this country running. Big Mike had been a regular for as long as I could remember. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, he'd roll in around 2 a.m., order a stack of blueberry pancakes and a coffee black as midnight. We'd chat while I topped off his mug, him regaling me with tales of the road and me filling him in on all the local gossip. But this Friday, his usual stool at the counter sat empty. At first, I didn't think much of it. Delays happen, even to the best drivers. But as the hours ticked by and there was still no sign of him, worry started to gnaw at my gut. It was Eddie, another regular, who brought the news that turned my concern into full-blown panic. "Hey, Darlene," he called out as he slid onto a stool. "You hear about Big Mike's rig?" I felt my heart skip a beat. "What about it?" Eddie's face was grim. "Found abandoned at the Cactus Flat rest stop. Engine's cold, no sign of Mike. Highway patrol's out there now, but they ain't found nothing yet. The coffee pot nearly slipped from my hand." "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "That ain't like Mike at all." Eddie nodded, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "I know, something ain't right, Darlene, you mark my words. I spent the rest of my shift in a daze going through the motions of serving customers while my mind raced with possibilities. Where was Mike? Why would he leave his rig? The man treated that truck like it was his child. By the time my replacement arrived for the night shift, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't just sit around waiting for news. I had to see for myself. The drive out to Cactus Flat was eerily quiet. The usually busy highway was all but deserted, my headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. As I pulled into the rest stop, I saw the flashing lights of a highway patrol car, casting everything in an otherworldly blue glow. I parked next to Mike's rig, its massive form looming over my beat-up Chevy like a sleeping giant. A young trooper approached as I got out, his hand resting cautiously on his holst. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation site. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I summoned my best motherly smile, the one that had gotten me out of more than a few speeding tickets over the years. "I understand, officer. I'm Darlene from the Starlight Diner. Big Mike's a friend of mine. I just wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." The trooper's stance relaxed a bit, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. "I appreciate that, ma'am, but there's really nothing—" He was cut off by a shout from his partner, who was examining the inside of Mike's cab. "Hey, Johnson, you better come take a look at this." As the young trooper jogged over to the truck, I followed, ignoring his half-hearted protest. What I saw inside the cab made my blood run cold. The interior was a mess, papers and personal belongings strewn everywhere. But what caught my eye was the steering wheel. It was covered in what looked like dried blood, with deep gouges carved into the leather as if by desperate clawing hands. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," I whispered, crossing myself out of long-buried Catholic habit. The older trooper turned to me, his face grave. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you some questions. How well did you know the driver of this vehicle?" I spent the next hour telling them everything I knew about Big Mike, his routette, his habits, the people he associated with. By the time I finished, more patrol cars had arrived, along with a CSI van. As I watched them swarm over Mike's truck like ants on a picnic basket, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Something terrible had happened here, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. I was about to head back to my car when I noticed something glinting in the beam of a flashlight near the edge of the parking lot. Curious, I wandered over for a closer look. It was a cell phone, the screen cracked but still faintly glowing. I recognized the gaudy rhinestone case immediately. It was Mike's, a gag gift I'd given him last Christmas. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, I scooped it up and slipped it into my pocket. Back in my car, I examined the phone more closely. The battery was nearly dead, but I managed to pull up the call history. The last number dialed was one I didn't recognize, made just hours before Mike's estimated time of disappearance. My finger hovered over the callback button. This was evidence in a police investigation. The right thing to do would be to turn it over to the troopers, but something held me back. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe just plain stubbornness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I wanted to find out what happened to Mike, I'd have to do it myself. Taking a deep breath, I hit the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when suddenly there was a click and a gruff voice answered. "Yeah?" I froze, unsure of what to say. Finally, I managed to stammer out, I'm looking for Mike. Is he there?" There was a long pause, then the voice spoke again, lower this time and tinged with menace. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the person on the other end must be able to hear it. "I'm a friend of Mike's," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's missing, and I'm worried about him. Please, if you know anything—" "Listen carefully," the voice cut me off. "If you know what's good for you, you'll forget this number and forget about Mike. He got in over his head, and now he's paying the price. Don't make the same mistake." The line went dead. I sat there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. What had Mike gotten himself into? And what did they mean by paying the price? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, my own cell phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number and contained only 4 words. Watching you. Drive away now. My blood turned to ice as I looked up, scanning the darkened rest stop. There, in the shadows beyond the reach of the floodlights, I saw the faint glow of a cigarette and the outline of a figure leaning against a car. With trembling hands, I started my engine and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind me. As I merged back onto the highway, my mind was racing. Whoever had taken Mike, they were powerful and they were dangerous, and now they knew I was involved. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white in the glow of the dashboard. I should go to the police, tell them everything I'd discovered. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. But as I drove through the night, Big Mike's face kept flashing in my mind. His booming laugh, his kind eyes, the way he always left me an outrageously large tip even when I knew he was struggling to make ends meet. No, I couldn't just walk away from this. Whatever trouble Mike was in, I owed it to him to try and help, even if it meant putting myself in danger. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I made a decision. I wasn't going home. Instead, I turned off at the next exit, heading towards the one person I knew who might be able to help me make sense of all this. My ex-husband, a private investigator with a knack for finding people who didn't want to be found. Whatever had happened to Big Mike, whatever dark forces were at play here, I was going to get to the bottom of it. And God help anyone who tried to stop me. The highway stretched out before me, dark and full of secrets, but I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. For Big Mike, and for all the other road warriors who called the Starlight Diner home, I would find answers, even if it killed me. Story 14. I've patrolled this stretch of highway for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunk drivers, high-speed chases, even the occasional wildlife incident. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found on that foggy Tuesday morning. It was the kind of discovery that makes you question everything you think you know about the world. The day started like any other. I clocked in for my shift at 6 a.m., grabbed a coffee from the station's ancient percolator, and hit the road. It was early autumn, and a thick fog had rolled in overnight, blanketing the highway in a ghostly shroud. Visibility was poor, so I was taking it slow, more focused on making sure no one else was driving like an idiot in these conditions. That's when I saw it. A semi-truck parked on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead. As I got closer, I could see its hazard lights blinking weakly through the mist. No movement, no signs of the driver outside checking on things. Just an 18-wheeler sitting silent and still in the fog. I pulled up behind it, flipping on my cruiser's lights to alert any oncoming traffic. The truck's engine was off, but I could hear the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. Recently stopped then. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the driver's side door, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Highway Patrol," I called out, rapping on the door with my knuckles. "Everything all right in there?" No response. I tried the handle unlocked. The door swung open with a creak and I was hit by a wave of warm air from inside the cab. The engine might have been off, but it hadn't been for long. "Hello," I called again, sweeping my flashlight across the interior. The beam caught on a half-empty coffee cup in the cup holder, wisps of steam still rising from its surface. A smartphone was plugged into the charger, its screen lighting up with a new message notification as I watched, but no driver. I frowned, a prickle of unease running down my spine. Something wasn't right here. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reeves. I've got an abandoned semi on Highway 16, mile marker 237. No sign of the driver. Run the plates for me, will you?" "Copy that, Reeves," came the crackled response. "Stand by." While I waited for dispatch to get back to me, I continued my inspection of the truck. The key was still in the ignition. In the sleeper cab, the bed was neatly made, looking unused. A duffel bag sat on top, zipped closed. Everything looked normal except for the glaring absence of the person who should be driving this rig. My radio chirped. "Reeves, we've got a hit on those plates. Truck belongs to a Joseph Malone. Registered address in Tacoma. No warrants, clean driving record." "Thanks, dispatch. Any reports of accidents or distress calls in the area?" "Negative, Reeves. All quiet out your way." I grunted an acknowledgement, my unease growing. Where the hell was this Malone guy? That's when I noticed the piece of paper on the passenger seat. It was folded in half with "Read Me" scrawled across the top in hasty handwriting. I hesitated for a moment. This was starting to feel less like a routine traffic stop and more like the opening scene of a horror movie. But curiosity won out. I picked up the note and unfolded it. The message inside made my blood run cold. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. They found me. Whatever you do, don't look in the trailer. Run now." I stared at the words, reading them over and over as if they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something that made sense. What the hell was this? Some kind of joke? A prank on unsuspecting highway patrol officers? But deep down I knew it wasn't. There was an urgency to the scribbled words, a desperation that you couldn't fake. Whoever wrote this was terrified. I should have called for backup right then. Should have waited for more officers to arrive before doing anything else. That's what protocol demanded. That's what common sense screamed at me to do. Instead, I found myself walking towards the back of the trailer, my hand resting uneasily on my holstered weapon. The fog seemed to thicken around me, muffling the sounds of passing cars on the highway. It felt like I was moving through a dream or a nightmare. The trailer's rear doors were secured with a heavy padlock. Standard procedure for most truckers, protecting their cargo from thieves, but something about it felt off. I leaned in closer, examining the lock. That's when I saw it. Tiny scratches around the keyhole as if someone had been frantically trying to pick it. From the inside, my heart was pounding now, blood rushing in my ears. Every instinct told me to walk away, to call this in and let someone else deal with whatever was going on here. But I couldn't. I had to know. I raised my flashlight, prepared to swing it at the lock. Just as I was about to strike, a sound froze me in place. A thump, coming from inside the trailer, followed by another and another. Something was in there, something alive. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "This is the police. If someone's in there, make some noise." The thumping stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined it all, I heard it. A voice muffled by the metal walls of the trailer, but unmistakably human. "Help us. Us." There was more than one person in there. Training took over. I grabbed my radio, calling for immediate backup and paramedics. As I rattled off our location to dispatch, I could hear more movement from inside the trailer. Voices, too low to make out words, but growing in volume and urgency. "Help is on the way," I shouted, hoping they could hear me. "Just stay calm. We'll have you out of there soon." The next few minutes felt like hours. I paced back and forth, torn between trying to break open the lock myself and waiting for backup to arrive. The voices from the trailer had gone quiet again, but occasionally I'd hear a thump or a scrape, reminding me that this wasn't some bizarre hallucination. Finally, blessedly, I heard sirens in the distance. Within minutes, the shoulder was lit up with the flashing lights of police cruisers and an ambulance. I quickly briefed the arriving officers, and we set to work on the lock. It took some doing. That padlock was heavy duty, but we eventually got it open. As the doors swung wide, I braced myself for whatever horror we might find inside. Nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The trailer was packed with people, men, women, even a few children, dozens of them huddled together in the darkness. They squinted against the sudden light, their faces a mix of fear and desperate hope. As paramedics rushed forward to assess the situation, one of my fellow officers whispered what we were all thinking. "Holy shit, it's a human trafficking operation." The next few hours were a blur of activity. More emergency vehicles arrived. The victims, for that's what they were carefully helped out of the trailer, given blankets and water, checked over by medical professionals. Many were dehydrated, some injured from the rough journey. But miraculously, everyone was alive. Detectives arrived to begin taking statements. Bits and pieces of the story emerged. The truck driver, Malone, had been coerced into transporting these people. Threatened, his family held hostage. But somewhere along the way, his conscience had gotten the better of him. He'd pulled over, left the note, and what? Gone to confront his blackmailers? Turned himself in at the nearest police station? We didn't know yet. As the sun finally burned away the last of the fog, I found myself sitting on the bumper of my cruiser, watching the organized chaos of the rescue operation. A young woman approached me, one of the blanket-wrapped figures from the trailer. She couldn't have been more than 20. "You found us," she said simply. her accent thick but her eyes clear. "You saved us." I shook my head. "I just answered a call. The driver, Malone, he's the one who saved you. I hope he's okay wherever he is." She nodded solemnly. "I will pray for him and for you." She touched my arm gently, then turned and walked back to the group of survivors. I've seen a lot in my years on the highway patrol. Accidents, crimes, acts of heroism, and moments of human folly. But I'll never forget that foggy morning, the abandoned truck, and the lives hidden inside it. It was a reminder that every routine call could be something more, that ordinary people can be pushed to extraordinary acts, both good and bad. And sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones hiding in the fog. They're the ones walking among us in broad daylight, treating human lives as cargo. As I gave my statement later that day, I couldn't help but think of Malone wherever he was. I hoped he was safe. I hoped he knew that his moment of courage had saved dozens of lives. And I hoped that someday I'd get the chance to shake his hand and thank him for reminding me why I put on this uniform every day. Story 15. The key card slid into the lock with a soft click, the green light blinking to life. Just another night at the Pinewood Motel. Or so I thought. Little did I know room 237 was about to become the center of a mystery that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Sarah, and I've been the night manager at this roadside motel for longer than I care to admit. You see a lot in this job. Tired truckers, couples looking for a discreet rendezvous, the occasional group of rowdy teenagers on a road trip. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It started ordinarily enough. The evening was quiet, just a handful of occupied rooms. Around 9 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man stepped out, his expensive suit a stark contrast to our modest establishment. He approached the front desk, sunglasses still on despite the late hour. "Good evening," I greeted him with my usual smile. "Welcome to the Pinewood Motel. How can I help you?" He glanced around nervously before leaning in. "I need a room, just for the night. Something discreet." I'd heard that request often enough, usually from married men sneaking around with their secretaries. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Of course, sir. I have a room at the end of the row. Very private." As I processed his payment, cash, of course, I couldn't help but notice his agitated state. His fingers drummed incessantly on the counter, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "Everything all right, sir?" I asked, handing him the key card to room 237. He snatched it quickly. "Fine, just fine. Thank you." And with that, he was gone, hurrying across the parking lot to his room. I shrugged it off. You learn not to pry in this business. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something about that man didn't sit right with me. Around midnight, I decided to do a quick patrol of the grounds. It was a habit I'd developed over the years just to ensure everything was in order. As I approached room 237, I noticed the curtains were drawn tight, but a sliver of light peeked through. That's when I heard it. A thud, followed by what sounded like frantic movement. Then silence. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the radio clipped to my belt. It could be nothing, just a guest moving furniture or dropping something. But my gut told me otherwise. Gathering my courage, I knocked on the door. "Sir, is everything all right in there?" No response. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear any sound of movement. Nothing. "This is the night manager," I called out again. "I'm coming in to check on you." I slid the master key card into the lock, my heart pounding. As the door swung open, I was hit by a wave of cold air. The room was dark, save for a small lamp on the nightstand, and it was empty. But signs of a hasty departure were everywhere. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets. A laptop sat open on the desk, its screen black, and there by the bathroom door was a small dark stain on the carpet. I approached slowly, my breath catching in my throat. It looked like blood. My hand shook as I reached for my radio. "Jerry," I called to our security guard. "I need you in room 237. Now." The next few hours passed in a blur. Police arrived, cordoning off the area. I answered their questions as best I could, describing the mysterious guest and the strange circumstances of his stay. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the motel, I found myself sitting on the curb, watching the flurry of activity around room 237. A detective approached, his face grim. "Ms. Thompson," he began. We're going to need access to your security footage." I nodded numbly. "Of course, whatever you need." He hesitated, then continued. "There's something else. A woman was reported missing last night. Her car was found abandoned about a mile from here. The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I unknowingly rented a room to a kidnapper, or worse? Days turned into weeks. The investigation continued, but answers remained elusive. The guest had used a fake name, paid in cash. The blood in the room, inconclusive. And the missing woman, still no trace. Life at the Pinewood Motel tried to return to normal, but for me, everything had changed. Each guest now carried the potential for danger. Each closed door could be hiding unspeakable secrets. It was about a month after the incident when I saw him again. I was doing my nightly rounds when a car pulled into the lot. My blood ran cold as I recognized the sleek black sedan. He didn't come to the front desk this time. Instead, he went straight to room 237, producing a key card from his pocket. My mind raced. How did he get that? I'd changed the locks myself after that night. Without thinking, I followed him. As I approached the room, I could hear muffled voices inside. A man and a woman arguing in hushed tones. "You promised it would be over by now," the woman hissed. "It's complicated," the man replied. I recognized his voice from that night. "We need more time." "Time? It's been a month. The police are still sniffing around. We need to end this now." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it through the door. What had I stumbled into? Suddenly, the voices stopped. Footsteps approached the door. I barely had time to duck around the corner before it opened. The woman emerged first. Even in the dim light, I could see she matched the description of the missing person. She was alive. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. The man followed, glancing around nervously before closing the door. They hurried to the car, speaking in whispers I couldn't make out. As they drove away, I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The missing woman wasn't missing at all. But why the charade? Why the blood in the room? It took me a moment to realize my phone was in my hand, the detective's number on the screen. All I had to do was press call. I could end this mystery right now. But something held me back. The woman had seemed not scared, but annoyed, like this was an inconvenience rather than a kidnapping. And the man, he wasn't acting like someone who had committed a crime, but like someone who was hiding from one. I lowered the phone, my mind racing. What if this wasn't what it seemed? What if by some twist of fate I had become entangled in something much bigger than a simple disappearance? The next morning I scoured the local news, looking for any updates on the case, and there it was, buried in the middle pages. Local CEO cleared of embezzlement charges. Key witness recants testimony. The photo accompanying the article made my breath catch. It was her, the missing woman. And suddenly pieces started falling into place. She wasn't a victim, she was a whistleblower. And that night in room 237, it wasn't an abduction. It was an escape. I never saw them again after that night. Room 237 returned to being just another room in a roadside motel. But I never forgot. Sometimes, late at night, when the motel is quiet and the neon sign flickers in the darkness, I think about them. I wonder where they are, if they found the peace they were looking for. And I think about the night I chose to keep their secret. In this job, you see all kinds of people, all kinds of stories. Some you forget as soon as they check out. Others stay with you, changing the way you see the world. The mystery of room 237 was one of those stories. It taught me that things aren't always what they seem, that sometimes the real mystery isn't what happened, but why, and that in a world of black and white, there are always shades of gray. As I sit here at the front desk, watching headlights sweep across the parking lot, I can't help but wonder about the secrets hidden behind each door. What stories are unfolding in the quiet rooms of the Pinewood Motel tonight? But that's the thing about this job. You never really know. All you can do is hand over the key, smile, and say, "Enjoy your stay," because in the end, everyone's got a story. And sometimes the most extraordinary tales are hidden in the most ordinary places. Like room 237 of a roadside motel where a mystery unfolded one night, and where a night manager learned that sometimes the right thing to do is to do nothing at all.